Before we begin, you will need to have a copy of the 2-point holistic rubric, the 3-point holistic rubric, and the mathematics scoring policy. Take a few minutes to print those out. Before we begin, it is worth taking a moment to frame our minds around the reason why we are making these changes, to truly prepare our students for college and careers, and how we are going to do this through a new set of standards, the Common Core, and the instructional shifts. We have all grown considerably with our familiarity with these shifts, so instead of doing a training, we're going to quickly review how these shifts will be evident in tests so that we are in a Common Core frame of mind when applying these rubrics for the first time. Shift 1 calls for focus. Teachers significantly narrow and deepen the scope of how time and energy is spent in the math classroom. They do so in order to focus deeply on only the concepts that are prioritized in the standards. In terms of test, priority standards will be the focus. Other standards will be de-emphasized. If Shift 2 calls for coherence, principals and teachers are being asked to carefully connect the learning within and across grades so that students can build new understanding onto foundations built in previous years. In terms of test, we will see this reflected through the progression of content and concepts as depicted in the standards across grade levels. Because of the way math works, if they have learned it before, they may have to use it with topics in later grades, such as using fractions learned in 3rd grade with measurement standards in 5th grade. With Shift 3 being fluency, students are expected to have speed and accuracy with simple calculations. Teachers structure class time and/or homework time for students to memorize through repetition core functions. Test implications involve the assumption that students process the required fluencies as articulated through grade 8. This will be reflected in test questions by the number choices in real-world problems. With Shift 4, Deep Understanding, students deeply understand and can operate easily within a math concept before moving on. As we recall, students learn more than the trick to get the right answer. They learn the math. The test, each standard will be assessed from multiple perspectives while not veering from the primary target of measurement for the standard. Not only will questions infuse additional standards beyond the targeted standard, each standard will be tested in many different ways. And finally, with Shifts 5, 6, Application and Dual Intensity, students are expected to use math and choose the appropriate concept for application even when they are not prompted to do so. And students are practicing and understanding. There is more than a balance between these two things in the classroom. Both are occurring with intensity. On tests, students will be expected to know grade-level mathematical content with fluency and to know which mathematical concepts to employ to solve real-world mathematics problems. In other words, students will not be explicitly prompted and they will see minimal scaffolding on tests. Some differences we will see in the tests this year as compared to last year are seen below. The new questions will require multiple steps involving the interpretation of operations. The new questions require conceptual understanding and fluency in order to complete test questions. The new problems are in a real-world problem context. The new questions require students to do things like decompose numbers and/or shapes, apply properties of numbers, and with the information given in the problem, reach an answer. Relying solely on algorithms will not be sufficient. As with the ELA rubrics, the math rubrics are also a holistic scoring. It is important to understand holistic scoring. Holistic scoring assigns a single score to a response that reflects the overall level of understanding demonstrated. Holistic scoring does not assign points for parts and is not punitive, marking down for each individual error. The score assigned to a response indicates the level of understanding, thorough, partial, limited, or not sufficient, for even limited, demonstrated by that response. When scoring, compare each student response to the guide and practice papers. The score assigned to the student's response is based on the score assigned to the training paper it most closely matches, not on how it compares to the previous response or your own standards. Guard against the danger of comparing the current student response you are scoring to the previous student response. Compare each response to the guide or practice set to determine its score. Doing otherwise will cause your scoring to drift. Scoring versus grading. Scoring a state test is quite different from grading classroom papers. When scoring holistically, a response is assessed based on the demonstrated level of understanding and how it compares to the rubric and training papers. When grading classroom papers, individual errors are totaled to determine the grade assigned. When grading, one purpose is to provide feedback on areas that need improvement, so a student can work on those areas as well as identify conceptual strengths. The purpose of scoring is to assess a student's demonstrated level of understanding at a specific point in time. This is why it is important to weigh and balance what a student does well with areas for improvement to find the best fit score for a response. Read through the next 2 slides to review common biases and ways to guard against them. Next, we will discuss the 2-point holistic rubric and the 2- and 3-point scoring policies. Take a minute to take out the 2-point holistic rubric. The 2-point rubric applies to all grades 3 through 8 short response questions. It is important to understand the differences in the language at each score point in the rubric. Please begin by reading the description for a 2-point score. A 2-point response answers the question correctly and demonstrates a thorough understanding. A 2-point response may not necessarily be without minor errors. Note the 2-point description is changed from complete and correct in the old rubric to answers the question correctly in the Common Core-based rubric. A 2-point response will still have the correct answer, but does not have to be flawless if a thorough understanding is clearly demonstrated. Take a moment to review the description of a 1-point. Some of the key language to focus on is partial understanding, addresses some elements, may contain an incorrect solution but applies a mathematically appropriate process, required work is not provided but contains a correct numerical answer, and a 0-point description. A 0-point response is incorrect, irrelevant, incoherent, or contains a correct response arrived using an obviously incorrect procedure. Although some parts may contain correct mathematical procedures, Holistically, they are not sufficient to demonstrate even a limited understanding of the mathematical concepts embodied in the task. Please take out the 2- and 3-point mathematics scoring policies. The pre-Common Core scoring policies and scoring clarifications have been reduced from 23 to 12 policy statements for the Common Core-based test. Make special note that only the policies in this document may be used when scoring student responses based on the Common Core standards. Let's read through the scoring policies. Please note in number 1, if a student does the work in other than a designated Show Your Work area, that work should still be scored. Number 2, if the question requires students to show their work and the students show appropriate work and clearly identifies a correct answer but fails to write that answer blank, the student should still receive full credit. 3, if the question requires students to show their work and the student shows appropriate work and arrives at the correct answer but writes an incorrect answer in the answer blank, the student should not receive full credit. Number 4, in questions that provide ruled lines for students to write an explanation of their work, mathematical work shown elsewhere on the page should be considered and scored. And policy 4 is modified from the previous policy where work outside the ruled lines would not have been considered. And number 5, if the student provides one legible response and one response only, teachers should score the response even if it has been crossed out. Scoring policy number 6. If the student has written more than one response but has crossed some out, teachers should score only the response that has not been crossed out. Number 7, trial and error responses are not subject to scoring policy number 6 above, since crossing out is part of the trial and error process. Number 8, if a response shows repeated occurrences of the same conceptual error within a question, students should not be penalized more than once. And number 9, please read the applicable bullet points for your grade level in questions that provide bar graphs. Scoring policy number 10. In questions requiring number sentences, the number sentences must be written horizontally. 11. In pictographs, the student is permitted to use a symbol other than the one in the key, provided that the symbol is used consistently in the pictograph. The student does not need to change the symbol in the key. The student may not, however, use multiple symbols within the chart, nor may the student change the value of the symbol in the key. And number 12, if students are not directed to show work, any work shown will not be scored. This applies to items that do not ask for any work and items that ask for work for one part and do not ask for work in another part. Please take out the 3-point holistic rubric for extended response questions. The 3-point holistic rubric applies to all grade 3 through 8 extended response questions. Let's begin to read through the rubric, beginning with a 3-point response. A 3-point response answers the question correctly. It demonstrates a thorough understanding, but it may contain errors that do not detract from the demonstration of understanding. A 2-point score is partially correct. It demonstrates a partial understanding, addresses most aspects of the tasks, may contain an incorrect solution but provides complete procedures, may reflect some misunderstanding of the underlying mathematical concepts or procedures. A score of 1 point is incomplete and exhibits many flaws, but is not completely incorrect. It demonstrates only a limited understanding, may address some elements of the task correctly, but reaches an inadequate solution, exhibits multiple flaws, reflects a lack of essential understanding, may contain correct numerical answer, but required work is not provided. And the description of a 0-point response is that it's incorrect, irrelevant, incoherent, or contains a correct response arrived at using an obviously incorrect procedure.